What's up, friends? Welcome to Mortuary Gaming. Before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you as we just passed 100 subscribers. And while that may not seem like a ton for a channel that's only existed for a month and for being my third video, I'm slobberingly grateful. So thank you so much. To show my appreciation, today we're going to be looking at a game suggested in my comment section by Alejandro Minero 3692. So if you have a game you'd like me to talk about, leave it in the comments. I plan on covering every single survival horror game released on the PlayStation 2, but the order in which I play them is more or less up in the air, so let me know what you'd like to see. Besides that, like and subscribe, and let's talk and take a look at Extermination. If you look up Extermination, you'll see that it was helmed by Tokuro Fujiwara, and his name is more or less attached to every article about the game, which makes sense as he was a very bankable name at the time. He was the executive producer on Extermination, and he created Sweet Home, thus grandfathering the entire genre of survival horror, as well as creating Tomba, which is also very good. However, by my estimation, that's not exactly the whole truth, and beyond not being the full story, it appears to me to be the least important part of it. According to legend, and by legend I mean some archived articles I've linked in the bio, you're welcome, please don't at me, I'm sorry. The birth of Extermination actually begins on the Sega Saturn with a game called Deep Fear. Deep Fear was a survival horror game released exclusively for the Sega Saturn that acted as the inspiration for the early development of Extermination. Now, there's been lots of conflicting stories on where things went from here, so I'm going to try and set the story straight as best as possible with the limited information that I can find online. Extermination was pitched to Sega as the sequel to Deep Fear by unknown developers Deep Space, and was turned down due to not being similar enough to Deep Fear's original source material. Then, the team went to Capcom, who allegedly turned the project down for it not being survival horror enough, which is very funny. Then the game was pitched to Sony, who picked it up. Yay! Okay, but I, as well as everybody else, am leaving out the most important part of this, which is that the director of Extermination, Yuzo Sugano, was the writer of Deep Fear. Homie was literally trying to pitch a sequel to his own game and told it wasn't right and kicked out the door. However, if you check out the game on Wikipedia, it says that the game was, quote, initially helmed by Fujiwara's team Whoopi, citing an IGN article about the new game by the Whoopi team, but this article was released in 2000, and the game had reportedly been in development since 1998 and turned down due to either not being survival horror enough or because the studio was, quote, unknown. The stinky thing about this, though, is that by the time the game was reportedly being shopped to studios, Fujiwara had already made Tomba and worked as the general producer on Resident Evil. So the idea that them being turned around with him being involved and saying that they were an unknown studio, I find very unlikely. So here's what I think happened, and this is total conjecture, but there ain't much to go on here, so I'm just gonna wing it. I think director Yuzo Sugano and his team Deep Space were trying to shop around their new game, a sequel to his own game, Deep Fear, and were turned down as Deep Fear wasn't exactly a hit, and they were generally unknown with that exception. Then, eventually, the team shopped it to Sony, where it was picked up, thus leading to the collaboration with Fujiwara, who had worked on Resident Evil and Tomba and had been rolling deep with Sony for a while at this point. Again, I can't confirm this, but that's how it looks to me. If you know differently, please let me know, and I'll say I was sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, let's talk about the game. First of all, damn, you go fast in this game. Compared to the pace of other stuff I've played so far, Extermination feels like a kart racer. I can run, I can jump, I can swing, I can skate, I can roll, I can dance. Wait a second. Oh God, hold on. Are you telling me the game developers were visionary enough to send a twink pirouetting across the sky, but I still have to be stationary to shoot?
Now that's ridiculous, folks.
The gun will auto-aim onto targets once you're close enough, which is a neat addition, but the Y-axis is inverted because there is no God. The game's tutorial has got to be the most frustrating part of the entire game for me. Playing it again after playing the game through, it wasn't that bad, but in the beginning, when you're not used to the camera and the controls, it's basically the driver tutorial of survival horror games. And the hardest platforming bit of the entire game is the first platforming objective you get. And all you have to do is cross a beam. What's the problem? I'll tell you the problem. The camera angles aren't fixed. The camera direction changes and you fall off. again and again and again. And it's really not even that hard, but as your first challenge, it's pretty disheartening. From here, though, the platforming maintains a crucial and fun role in the gameplay, and I'm not sure if these elements were there before Fujiwara stepped in, but seeing as he was the man behind Tamba, I could definitely see the possibility of him having some influence here. Something I like a lot about the game is the way your gun works. Usually in a game like this, you'd get a multitude of weapons which you have to be choosy about using as they take up significant inventory space. Extermination doesn't have inventory management mechanics, so instead you just continue modding out your super ultra mega weapon and changing between firing modes in the menu, which can be accessed at any time by pausing the game. I think this is a really solid way of doing things, and your gun looks freaking incredible as a result, and it makes causing the enemies to explode into diarrhea all the more exciting. This brings up a point I thought about a lot during my time with Extermination, which is the idea of whether or not this is a survival horror game. It's a thought I'm trying to push out of my mind during my journey of playing through these games as much as possible, a journey which you're all a part of right now. Yay! Subscribe please, thanks! But it's also a thought that was nipping at my heels consistently throughout my time with it. In fact, I had an entire bit planned out for this video about how the game is not actually survival horror at all, but as I was writing, I realized it actually is, and I was wrong. Here, let me explain. These are some things that evoke the feel and overall experience of a survival horror game to me. Now, pulling from the same list, here are the survival horror mechanics employed by Extermination. While it may not have fixed camera angles, slow movement, interactable items, inventory management, puzzles, or jump scares, it still contains scary monsters, limited ammo, safe rooms, backtracking, incredible hair, oppressive atmosphere, and notes that unpack the story as you go along. That's more classic mechanics than most games even in the action horror genre have. So why was I so convinced it wasn't survival horror? I think it's because the mechanics it chooses to employ are some of the ones I would consider to be the least important overall. Like, sure, we've got scary monsters, limited ammo, and backtracking, but when you add in platforming, fast movement, no fixed camera, and a multitude of cinematic action movie cutscenes, it stops feeling like a survival horror game and more like an action game with an identity crisis. It feels and plays like an action game, yet it still pushes you to save ammo, even though bullets are constantly flying around you in every direction. And while there are ammo refill spots, they only apply to your rifle, which you don't really even get that much ammo for, all things considered. So if you play it like a survival horror game, you're going to be consistently taking damage, and if you play it like an action game, you run out of ammo constantly, and nobody is really happy. About halfway through the game, the backtracking really starts kicking into gear. Backtracking in a survival horror game is usually very enjoyable for me, as the environment with its fixed camera and incredible sound design really carry me through its terrifying atmosphere. However, in Extermination, you've just got the cold, metallic, gridiron environments often found in action games, overall forgettable sound and music, and underwhelming level design, so the backtracking completely lacks anything that keeps me as one of the 6 people on planet Earth who actually enjoys backtracking.
Oh, stop booing. There's nothing wrong with it. There are dozens of us. Dozens!
Alright, let's talk about the story. This is what I want to talk about the most. This is incredible. Extermination follows Dennis, a Marine.
I'm a Marine. Don't mix us up with the Army.
Hell yeah, brother.
Along with his bro Chad band of brothers, are tasked with following up on a distress call from a remote military base nestled deeply within the frozen tundra of Antarctica. This is an especially personal task for Dennis, as Cindy is likely inside the facility, but before doing so, the game introduces us to one of the most unique, strangest, and out-of-left-field narrative devices I've seen in a survival horror game on this generation so far. Therapy!
An old teacher once told me, life is full of pain and suffering. You have to be strong to deal with it. Dennis, don't let it distract you.
Wow! Thanks, Doc. That's incredible advice. I'll have to remember that one. Next time I'm sad, I'll just tell my emotions to get good. You get to the base, learn that the place has been overrun by monsters unleashed due to mad scientists or whatever, and oh, the fort is built above a nuclear power reactor. But it's all good, dude, don't even worry about it. We eventually do find Cindy, and she's very cold and disinterested in us being there due to something that happened in the past. But don't worry, these guys will figure it out because Cindy also has a therapist.
I know what you must be feeling. But trying so hard to forget the past is just going to make things worse.
What are you talking about?
As long as you're trying to forget, you won't be forgetting at all. You don't have to forget. You don't even have to forgive. Instead, try putting yourself in his shoes and accept the situation. You'll feel a lot better. It must be hard for him, too.
I'm tired.
What the f*** is this game? Resident Evil, Metal Gear Solid, and cognitive behavioral therapy. Later, we learn the Marines have orders to blow up the place and leave no trace of it being there. When Dennis asks, what about the survivors?
What about the survivors?
Roger, the bro Chad therapist we met earlier, says this.
Our primary objective is to destroy this facility. We'll worry about survivors later.
What do you mean later? Once we've blown them up? I'm not sure that Dennis really cares about any of the other survivors much, but he knows one of them personally, so now he's invested in not doing genocide. Dennis has got to be the wimpiest, most flaccid excuse for a leading man I've ever seen, and I'm honestly shocked people are not talking about this.
Taylor! Taylor!
You've got these grand, over-the-top action cinematics, all these tough and rugged Marines, but as the lead, Dennis is a wet noodle. And that's not coming from a place of toxic masculinity. I'm a queer YouTuber who plays PS2 games and writes essays on them. I am quite the noodle boy myself. But come on, man, I'm not even asking for a Chris Redfield. Even an Ethan Winters would do better than Dennis. Here's another exhibit on why Dennis is the worst. Later, we find Cindy's therapist, Sonia, killed. Oh, okay, she's not really her therapist. I shouldn't say that with such confidence. She's a person who's around. She's nice. So we find Sonia dead, hanging gruesome from the inside of a fleshy monstrosity attached to the wall. And Dennis finally makes a decision.
I can't tell Cindy, no way. It would be too much for her right now.
Dude, come on! You're already in the doghouse, little homie! Now we're adding lying to the list? She's just starting to, be nice to you again! What are you doing? Honestly, as you might be able to tell, this is my favorite thing about the game. It's not the Crash Bandicoot-ass platforming or the Tony Hawk Pro Marine moments. It's the weird amount of melodrama and fake deep emotional beats that have no business being here. I got so excited for every cutscene because I knew there was going to be some kind of ill-fitting, angular poignance waiting for me on the other side. Extermination was released on July 25th, 2001, the same day the New York Post revealed that Robert De Niro and his wife were looking for therapists. I know who I'd recommend.
You have to be strong to deal with it.
Reviews were pretty mixed, with IGN giving the game a 6.9 and said, if you just look at the score, you'll probably come to the conclusion that Extermination is a bad game and wasn't something that I enjoyed playing. But that's not quite the truth. I actually had a lot of fun playing through it, despite some initial misgivings, and didn't feel like it was a waste of my time in any way. A lot of games we have to review give off this feeling. This is the overall feeling of pretty much all the reviews I came across, and it's one that I share. Even when I was frustrated, I felt like I was at least experiencing something interesting and worth talking about, which, as I'm sure I will understand all the more later, is not something to be taken for granted. There are two versions of the cover art, as usual, with the North American release appealing to horror fans with its snowy, foreboding, out-of-frame creatures, while the PAL art took a more action-lean and an interesting turn of events, evoking a kind of siphon filter Splinter Cell vibe. Finding sales figures for obscure games like this is always a challenge, but according to the aforementioned IGN article, it didn't exactly make the biggest splash. Sony's Extermination is one of those titles that seemed to generate a lot of hype when it was first announced before almost completely disappearing off the face of the earth. Even after being released in Japan, there seemed to be very little interest on this side of the pond, despite the fact that it received better than average reviews from its hometown press. Deep Space dissolved a couple years later upon releasing their second and final game, also a survival horror game titled Hungry Ghosts. Oh, we will get to Hungry Ghosts. Don't you worry. But that's it today, friends. If you had a good time, please remember to like and subscribe. I also have a Discord server up now, so if that's your thing, follow the link in the bio. Otherwise, have a great week, and I'll smell you later.